can you see that cold air beginning to spread a little bit further south across Scotland?
There will be
You could be joining the Great British Giveaway list of winners with your chance to grab a fantastic £50,000 in tax-free cash.
My name is Cliff.
And my name is Julie, and we won 25,000. I'd say don't hesitate, do it. If you're not in it, you've got no chance of winning it.
For another chance to win, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. You can call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Or post your name and number to GB10 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 31st of January. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's a time for the vegan community to get together, as well as an opportunity for non-vegans to try going plant-based.
Well, joining us now is some of her delicious hummus. We both love hummus. This is a great thing. This is the founder of Chickpea, Hannah McCollum. Hannah, lovely to meet you. And you've brought in some of your beautiful products in front of you here. So can you talk us through some of them?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a range of chilled hummus, and then latest to the range are a new ambient snack pot, which is a fridgeless hummus that doesn't require refrigeration. But I started Chickpea because of my love for hummus, but also sustainability and reducing food waste and encouraging people to be more plant-based without saying go vegan.
Does normal, say, traditional hummus have anything that's not vegan appropriate in it?
Not really.
No,
I think
it's always chickpeas, olive oil, maybe some other bits.
Yeah, lemon juice, aquafibre or water to help with the consistency, garlic, and rapeseed oil or olive oil.
And there's a bit of a misconception about veganism that I hear a lot, where people say, "Look, I'm not a vegan. I love my steaks. I'll just get out of there now." But but there's a misconception that you don't get the protein, you don't get the fats, and you're kind of just eating processed salads and fake meat and things. But that's not quite the case, especially with chickpeas, right?
Yeah, I think protein is really important, and actually a lot of people think I need a certain amount of fish every week or meat, but actually a lot of the fish and meat that you're eating are eating higher protein foods, so algae, seaweed, pulses, all these types of plant-based foods. For me, veganism is like you could have a delicious rye seeded bread with just loads of roasted vegetables, seeds, tahini sauce on top.
That sounds
and there's nothing beige in there at all.
GB News, the People's Channel.
A very good afternoon. It's 1 o'clock on Sunday, the 29th of December. This is The Weekend on GB News. Now, at least 179 people have died after a plane crash-landed and collided with a wall at South Korea's Muan International Airport in the early hours of this morning. We're going to be on the ground in South Korea this hour, and later in the show, I'll be joined by an airline pilot. How much of a risk is this in Britain? French authorities have confirmed that 3 migrants died and dozens rescued after a small boat capsized in the English Channel. This comes after GB News revealed yesterday that 1,300 small boats had made the perilous journey since Christmas Day. And we'll be live on a farm as the Prime Minister's approval ratings are branded catastrophic, with the rural voters in the rural heartlands of our country actually condemning Labour with a damning poll. And the fog that's covered large swathes of the country finally begins to clear. Oh, but, well, don't get too excited. It's going to be replaced by snow and rain as we welcome in the new year. Just how much of a damp squib will the start of 2025 really be? I'm Darren Grimes, and this is The Weekend. Now, this show is absolutely nothing without you and your views. Let me know your thoughts on all of the stories we'll be discussing today by visiting gbnews.com/your say and join the conversation. Now, keeping me company on today's show is the former Labour advisor, Paul Richards, and the deputy editor of Spiked, Fraser Myers. But before we get stuck into today's stories, here's your news headlines with Sophia Wensler.
Darren, thank you. Good afternoon. It's just gone 1 o'clock. These are your headlines. Foreign Secretary David Lammy has offered his heartfelt condolences to the people of South Korea and Thailand after a plane crash killed 179 people. 2 crew members have been rescued, but all other people are feared dead. The youngest victim was a 3-year-old boy, according to local media outlets, and 5 of those killed were children under the age of 10. It's understood the Boeing 737-800 jet was making a second attempt at a crash landing after its landing gear failed to open. The fire service says it believes a collision with birds and poor weather may be to blame. The Azerbaijan Airlines plane that crashed, killing 38 people, was damaged while over Russia due to shooting from the ground. That's according to the country's president. President Aliyev said he regretted that some circles in Russia had tried to hush up the truth about the crash by sowing false narratives about the causes of it. It comes after Russia's President Vladimir Putin apologised for what he called a tragic incident over Russia, in which the Azerbaijan Airlines plane crashed after Russian air defences were fired against Ukrainian drones. The UK has rejected Putin's apology and called for a full and independent investigation. Now, at least 3 people have died attempting to cross the channel in small boats this morning, according to French authorities. A large-scale rescue operation off the coast of Calais began early this morning after reports around 50 people had struggled to board a boat. Officials confirmed 3 people had died and 45 others had been rescued, with 4 being taken to hospital with hypothermia. It comes after news yesterday that 1,300 migrants have now crossed the English Channel since Christmas Day. The Prime Minister has promised to smash the gangs behind the crossings, but more than 22,000 people have arrived since he took office. That's up 25% on last year. In other news, the UK has pledged millions of pounds more to Ukraine to help investigate Russian war crimes. The Ministry of Defence announced it will give bodies, including the Ukrainian Prosecutor General's office, £4.5 million to help bring Russian war criminals to justice. The government had previously pledged £6.2 million to help prosecute war crimes. The UN concluded in 2022 that war crimes had been committed during the conflict, citing evidence of executions, torture, and sexual and gender-based violence. Elon Musk has endorsed the right-wing Alternative for Deutschland party in a guest opinion piece for the Welt am Sonntag newspaper, prompting its opinion editor to resign in protest. In the article, the tech billionaire explained why he had posted on the social media platform X last week that only the AfD can save Germany. He wrote the portrayal of the AfD as right-wing extremists is clearly false, considering that Alice Weidel, the party's leader, has a same-sex partner from Sri Lanka. He says, "Does that sound like Hitler to you?" Shortly after the piece was published, the editor of the opinion section, Eva Marie Kogel, wrote on X that she had submitted her resignation with a link to the commentary. And thick fog is set to cause further flight delays today, disrupting Gatwick Airport's busiest day of the holiday period. Flights at Stansted Airport were affected by the weather conditions yesterday, while live departure boards showed delays at Heathrow, Luton and Manchester airports. The UK's main air traffic control provider said temporary air restrictions will continue today as airfields are affected by fog. Those are the latest GB News headlines. Now it's back to Darren.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to news alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you very much, Sophia. Let's get stuck into today's topics. 179 people have died after a plane crash. Well, it crash-landed and collided with a wall at South Korea's Muan International Airport in the early hours of this morning. Now, according to local transport officials, the jet was arriving from the Thai capital, Bangkok, and was carrying 175 passengers and 6 crew members, only 2 of whom have been recovered from the wreckage. A miracle indeed. Authorities have cited a malfunction of landing gear as a possible cause of the crash, but have also revealed a bird strike warning was in place at the time. The recovery effort continues, with Yonhap News Agency reporting that the search has now shifted to recovering the bodies. Well, joining me live from the South Korea capital, Seoul, is the journalist Raphael Rashid. Raphael, thank you very much for your company. Just how much of a threat is the bird strike incident and this warning that came before the incident that's taken place today? How regular are these occurrences?
Yes. For the time being, the official cause of the accident has not been given. There is an ongoing investigation, but many signs seem to suggest that there was a certain bird collision. One of the 2 survivors who are stewards on this aircraft, one of them was able to communicate after the accident, saying that indeed there was a bird collision, and footage just before it landed shows that there was something that struck the side of the aircraft, and then there was fire. These things, of course, are incredibly rare occurrences and do not happen frequently. But when they do happen, they can be deadly. Think of it like a bullet hitting someone. It's going at such a rapid speed that the collision impact is of several tons if it were even just a bird, just one or a few birds, and they can cause significant damage. But we have yet to wait for the official conclusions from any investigation that come out in the next few days.
And what is the feeling on the ground there? Because I have no doubt that this will, of course, cause a great deal of anxiety in the country itself. What is the atmosphere?
I think it's a very somber atmosphere at the moment. I think everyone is mourning the loss of 179 passengers. The acting president, Choi Sang-mok, has declared a period of 1 week mourning until early January. And I think it's there was a crowd crush 2 years ago that killed over 150 people, and now we're having this absolute catastrophe. And I think many people will be remembering December 29 for a very long time for what has happened today.
And of course, the president is newly installed as president, given the political turmoil that's been going on in South Korea. I mean, how much of a difficult wicket is this for the new administration?
This is going to be a major test for the new acting president. He's only been in his role for 2 days. He's inheriting a bunch of other crises affecting the country, namely the political crisis that has completely plagued Parliament over the past few weeks following a failed martial law declaration by President Yoon Suk-yeol. But maybe this is a time for him to prove himself. It is maybe also a time for the rival political parties to put aside their animosity that has brought so much political chaos over the past few weeks and come together and help in the relief efforts. I know that the 2 main political parties, left and right, have gone to Muan and are helping and meeting with the bereaved families. And hopefully this can be something that they can work together with instead of being against one another.
Yeah. Is there any of a indication as to when we'll understand more about what happened during this horrific incident from the black boxes that will be retrieved from the plane itself? How fast a turnaround can we expect?
I am predicting we'll have a quite fast turnaround, given that they have retrieved the 2 black boxes from the wreck, the voice recordings as well as the data. So that has already been retrieved, and we've already seen notices about the air traffic control tower that warned of a specific bird risk. And so I think we've got plenty of information coming out over the next few hours that will help us determine what has truly happened, probably over the next few days.
And then once we get that, I assume there will be manufacturer calls for a look into this incident itself, and then potentially a wider international outcome.
I think if the bird strike is confirmed, there will be, of course, an investigation and maybe further restrictions or maybe regulations into trying to prevent these from happening. Of course, the problem with bird strikes is that we cannot completely get rid of them, but we can try to prevent them with different technologies, whether it's water cannons or sounds, and they're releasing these kind of AI systems to detect the flows and patterns of where the birds will be at any given time. But some people on the ground are saying that with climate issues, the migratory patterns of birds are becoming more unpredictable. And so some people are saying that it will also become very difficult for people to find where birds are going at any given time in any given place.
Fascinating. Raphael, thank you very much for your company and for that update. That's the journalist Raphael Rashid from Seoul. Now, let's see what my panel make of this. The former Labour advisor Paul Richards and the deputy editor of Spiked, Fraser Myers. Paul, I never even knew about this bird strike phenomena. Like, it had never crossed my radar, so to speak, before. The whole issue of biodiversity is actually called into question around that particular issue, because the closer you have biodiversity to an airport, the more vulnerable the planes are.
Well, birds will fly in the sky, unfortunately, and this is a terrible, terrible tragedy. So our first instinct is, of course, just to send our support to those families that are suffering this time, and it's awful. My father was an air traffic controller, and he spent, 35 years of a working life staring at a screen, stopping aeroplanes from crashing into each other. Two-dimensional screen, having to imagine three-dimensional skies, and it's a reminder that we have this incredible panoply of safety and regulation, and the civil aviation authorities all over the world do everything they can to stop this kind of tragedy occurring, and that's why it is such a rare thing. But flights were cancelled yesterday and the day before because of the weather in this country, and then people were moaning and complaining they couldn't get abroad and get to their holidays or whatever. That's why they cancel flights, is because if you don't have that safety, if you don't take into account the weather and these other factors, then terrible things like this can happen.
What do you say to those that say, oh, come on, the fog, they're able to guide themselves without any vision whatsoever these days because of the plane technology and radar systems can...
Well, I think people are they forget that they are in a tin tube in the sky travelling 1,000 miles an hour. It is a dangerous business without the safety, and I think even with all of the computer technology that the airplanes have now, there's still a pilot that needs to land and take off, and if they say it's too foggy, you just have to sit back and say that's fair enough, because it is a dangerous business, even though statistically it's not, obviously, an event like this. Interesting that your correspondent there was just talking about the political implications there, because these kinds of terrible events can make or break political leaders, and it might be that the new leader in Seoul today is going to be able to sort of show empathy and show leadership and do things that people expect from somebody in that role, and it might be sort of a political moment as well.
After quite a chilling call for martial law from the last guy, it was extraordinary. Fraser, the point here is that these incidents are rare, right? But when you see in the news a series of them so close in a cluster, you start to panic a little bit. You know, I'm not the greatest at going. It's the going up that gets me.
Yeah.
The actual takeoff. Once I'm up there, I'm fine. But, you know, if you're someone of a nervous disposition when it comes to flying, I doubt this kind of episode will help.
No, but people should feel reassured that travelling by air is incredibly safe. We did have a period, I think just before the COVID pandemic, where there were almost no plane crashes in a row for several years. It's really unfortunate that we've had this incident, which we're still quite baffled by, especially in a country like South Korea, which has incredibly high safety standards. Their aviation industry is incredibly safe. This company, Jeju Airlines, has never had a fatal accident ever in its 20 years of operations. This is, as you say, this is a rare and baffling case that we need to get to the bottom of. The other case recently over, over Russia is an entirely different kettle of fish, and and that has nothing to do with the safety or otherwise of airlines. That's to do with the war being waged, a terrible war being waged between Russia and Ukraine. But no, look, air travel is extremely safe. It is probably safer than, taking your car down the motorway. Not that you should be put off from doing that either, but people shouldn't be afraid. And even things like turbulence is actually not particularly dangerous. It's a little bit like going over pebbles on a road, but it feels more dangerous because you're, several thousand feet up in the air and being shaken about. I think
we've got to get fewer people on planes, though. I think the golden age of air travel, I think, should have really been and gone for environmental reasons, but also because I think trains are far better. And I think getting on the train takes a bit longer, much nicer journey.
Well, see, I don't agree with... Well, you can't get to South Korea, for example, on a plane.
No, it would take a while.
It would. But on that point, though, the Labour government is pursuing this strategy if you consider air passenger duty and these other taxes on the flights, in the name of the green agenda, of course, but actually as a revenue-raising method. Now, do you see this as a naked assault on our ability to have one measly holiday a year?
Yeah, I think it's a great tragedy. It wasn't that long ago, before the days of Ryanair or whatever, where working class people couldn't afford to go abroad and to travel, beyond beyond Britain, really. I think it's amazing that the skies and the world has been opened up to so many people, not just in the West as well. Many people getting richer in the East, wanting to travel, wanting to visit, wanting to come here and spend their money in many cases. I think it's a really, really... I don't know, there's something quite, I think, miserablist about saying that we should travel less.
I think people should travel, but they should go to our own seaside towns. We could see an amazing revival of places like Eastbourne, where I live. It would be great if people got on the train and they came for their holidays in these lovely places all over the country, not just in the southeast. And, it saves the environment. But also, I think a family holiday, much nicer in the UK.
Well, I mean, I think a British person going to Benidorm for a holiday, that's not going to do much to stop China building a new coal power
but that's your argument about everything, isn't it? That we should do nothing because China's doing it all.
No, we just shouldn't make ourselves cold and poor, I think, is my answer.
And let's not reduce people's opportunities. I would also love to see a revival of these great British seaside towns. They're in big trouble, but stopping people from going abroad elsewhere is not the way to do that.
All right, that was Fraser Myers there and Paul Richards before him. Now, for all the best analysis and opinion on that story and more, you can go to our website. We're at gbnews.com. You're with me, Darren Grimes, on GB News. Lots more coming up on the show. In just a minute, we'll be live on a dairy farm in Scotland. There's some fury going on out there for an exclusive insight into the never-ending toil farmers endure throughout the festive period. Do we know enough? All of that and more to come. You're with GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg and this is GB News, Britain's news channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
What about train Wi-Fi? The Times. It's so funny the Times did this story because I was on the train yesterday trying to do some work and connecting to the Wi-Fi, and it happens all the time. It just doesn't work. It's pathetic. And then I opened the Times and they've done a massive investigation. Loads of different rail routes from north to south.
Was that the James Bond thing, right?
Yes. Yeah. What's
that passenger almost got through one episode. One James Bond movie in 8 hours.
But you know, it's interesting. We call it train Wi-Fi, but it isn't. It's just really a SIM card on a train, really. So if your own phone's not going to get signal, why would we assume that the train's going to have signal? It just doesn't work like that. Unless you're in Japan or South Korea, whose infrastructure is infinitely better than ours, you're just not going to get signal. You have to download those films way before you get on
There is technology that can help with that. You know, there really is. If they found ways to put it underground, they can get it on ground and get you going. I definitely think, you know, with the price that we're paying for these tickets, they can get the Wi-Fi going. There is technology.
That's why it's so frustrating, isn't
Call
it?
Elon, get a Starlink, let's go.
If you're a passenger paying hundreds of pounds for a season ticket or whatever you call it, and, you know, commute to work every single day, and you're paying all this money, and you can't.
It's so expensive. You'd expect Wi-Fi at the basic. Yeah, exactly.
But it happens with phone signal as well. I'll be walking down London in Park Lane or somewhere else, or down on the south coast. I just don't have phone signal, and I think to myself, what on earth is going on?
Doesn't it feel like 5G's made it worse, though?
Yeah.
Because I feel like 4G, that didn't happen so much, but 5G just feels like...
Yeah, and then I always get this little E in the top corner of my phone, and I don't get any signal. I think it's got worse over the past couple of years. Yeah, especially with 5G. I agree with that.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent? I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial. And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born. It's everything you need to kickstart your evening. Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it. That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to The Weekend with me, Darren Grimes. Now, the Prime Minister's approval ratings have been branded catastrophic amongst rural voters in a new damning poll following that planned tax raid on farmers. Now, despite being hit with Labour's inheritance tax, many family farms continue, of course, to fight on against the modern-day challenges facing the stretched industry. We're going to cross now to the town of Monkline in Scotland with our Scotland reporter, Tony Maguire. Tony, are you cold up there, my friend?
Good afternoon, Darren. You know, I am a little bit chilly, but I think we're all bred with a bit thicker skin up here. Much like my fuzzy friends behind me, I am, of course, at Mossgiel Farm in Monkline in Ayrshire, and it's here where farmer Bryce Cunningham, well, he's devised an incredible plan to create a milk that is as pure and nutritious as it was in the days of Rabbie Burns. Now, that's because about 50 yards off to my right was the land that Robert Burns once worked as a crofter here many, many years ago. And it's in this area of South Ayrshire that's really a huge farming community. So, you know, when we hear that Keir Starmer isn't particularly popular with those in rural communities and our farmers, well, who better in Scotland to really talk about the issue today than here on Mossgiel Farm. Now, I've had a great day so far. I've met a lot of the lovely ladies, some of which you can see pottering around behind me. And, you know, an extra special little meeting today with, I was invited into one of the cow sheds where one of the cows, one of Bryce's cattle here at Mossgiel, well, it gave birth to a beautiful little calf. And you know, because we're here looking at farms and because we're looking at how farms don't stop, especially in this festive break, you know, I wanted to ask him about this occasion and what that's like for a small farm such as this in Mossgiel. Have a wee look here.
See one here, this was actually just born about half an hour ago when we were walking around the farm. We run something quite unique called a cow with calf system here in Maskeel. We're one of only 2 farms in Scotland operating commercially in this way. I think there's about 15 or 16 across the UK. And what we do is the baby calves are born and they stay with her mother for the first 24 hours with no human contact other than we make sure the calf's okay, we make sure it's healthy, we make sure mum's okay. After that, to the mum, Paulina, she'll be moved into the milking parlour for her first milking after 24 hours. We'll check that milk's healthy, we'll check she's healthy and everything's okay. And then the calf will spend the rest of the day with her. After that, the calf comes in at 6 o'clock at night into this pen, so we effectively put the kids to bed, a bit like me putting one of my 4 kids to bed. And they'll stay in here for 12 hours. When mum goes back out into the main shed, or in the summer they go back out to grass. They make more milk, we bring them in the next morning, we get that milk in the morning, the calves get all the milk during the day. It means we only milk the cows once a day, and the cows and calves get to stay together, so we effectively share the milk and use the best of both worlds.
Now, one of the interesting parts that I've learned from Bryce today is the fact that even though this is technically classed as a tiny farm, Bryce himself only has around 12 cows of which he milks, but he welcomes cows from lots of various, or milk even, from lots of dairy farms around, because he's part of a cooperative here in Ayrshire, which is in part of a larger cooperative across Scotland. And Bryce is telling me today that it's through those cooperations and through those connections he has with other local farmers in the community here in Ayrshire and across Scotland that they're hoping to find some strength to really continue to push back against the changes that were brought in the budget. Now, those changes, of course, the changes to inheritance tax, which could slap farms like this at 20% tax. But here in Scotland, well, that once ring-fenced money for agriculture, that is now going to be lumped in with the grant fund, the block grant, and that is going to mean farmers are going to fight even harder for every penny.
And what is the Scottish Parliament's response to all this then? Because the voters of Mauchline will be saying, well, hang on a minute, what are you actually doing for us in Ayrshire?
Yes, I mean, that's correct. Certainly the Scottish Government was quite quick out the gates following the budget, with First Minister John Swinney saying that, you know, he was appalled at the very idea of changes to the way families pass down farms. And even, to get this, even Scottish Labour, well, they've come out pretty much against it as well. You know, we're seeing an even bigger divide these days between Scottish Labour and UK Labour. It's going to be an interesting year ahead to see whether this really takes root or whether there's still hope at the end of this tunnel for farmers.
Exactly. Interest in politics in Scotland, with Labour in Scotland opposed to the actual national government. It's quite extraordinary. Anyway, Tony Maguire there in Mauchline in Ayrshire, thank you very much for that update. Those farmers are heroes in my eyes. Let's see what my panel make of this. The former Labour advisor Paul Richards and the deputy editor of Spiked, Fraser Myers. Paul, I've got to let you say why you support this absolutely awful policy.
Well, I think for the first thing to say is that the change in the tax doesn't actually impact on most farms. It's a small number of farms. And those that it does, some of them, let's face it, aren't really farmers at all. They're stockbrokers who bought some land to do an inheritance tax dodge.
In Mauchline there in Ayrshire, he didn't look like a stockbroker to me.
That farm is a co-op farm, so I'm not quite sure whether that'd be affected or not, because it's not a family-owned, it's a part of a cooperative. And they're still, even those farms that are affected by this, they're not paying the same rate as the rest of us. It's still a lower rate, and they've got longer to pay it. So I just would invite people to look at the detail of the policy and see that it's not that unfair.
But
it's only fair. People have paid their fair
They can also
whack.
see that the rest of us aren't producing food for the nation to eat and to sustain us all.
Well, but we're not against farming.
Well, you evidently are.
You know, this is a tax that affects a small number of farms.
No,
this
is a land grab so that you can pave over it with solar panels.
Certainly not. No, we do support the farming industry, but this is, you know, there are militant farming organisations that are trying to bring down the government over this, and that's only a tiny, tiny number of people in amongst a much bigger agricultural industry that aren't affected by it.
Do you see, Fraser, this as an assault that's part of a sort of green agenda, right? Because in Mauchline, in Ayrshire, you look at those scenes with the work that has to go in to these farms, right? And to be told that a farm that's potentially been in the family for generation after generation is going to be taken away from you. So the Labour Party, for some bizarre reason, can pave over it with useless renewables. You know, that to me is heartbreaking.
I mean, I don't know if that's necessarily the plan, but I think what all this exposes, I think, is a big divide between the political class, and not just the Labour Party, because there are big farmers' protests all across Europe as well, but a divide between the political class and I guess what you'd call the real economy. And I think, you know, people in the Treasury or people in Brussels, it may be, or in various national governments and capitals, you know, they might see the numbers on a spreadsheet and say this inheritance tax thing makes sense, or let's put the tax up of diesel as they have in some places. But they're not thinking necessarily about how that, you know, the outsized impact that is having on the ground in terms of actual farmers. And you mentioned the green agenda, and I think that is, if Starmer follows what the EU is pushing, then then farms will be in very deep trouble, because they're looking to cut, you know, rates of nitrogen. Different national governments have come up with different proposals, but some of them have included quickly shelved ideas to, like, cull hundreds of thousands of cattle, things like that. So there have been huge protests over in Europe over these things. We should be able to avoid them. I don't think we will, because I think that the government doesn't quite understand how agriculture and farming works. It just doesn't have its feet to the ground on these issues, unfortunately.
Well, Starmer's a technocrat, so he loves the EU, so we'll leave that one to the viewers to decide. But thank you very much to my panel there, former Labour advisor Paul Richards and the Deputy Editor for Spiked, Fraser Myers. You're with me, Darren Grimes, on GB News. We've got plenty more coming up on today's show. We'll be discussing a Daily Mail exclusive on Kemi Badenoch's row with Nigel Farage, in which the Tory leader is reported to have accused this very broadcaster, a certain GB News, of offering a haven for her critics. That and so much more after the news with Sophia Wensler.
Darren, thank you. Your headlines at 1:33. Foreign Secretary David Lammy has offered his heartfelt condolences to the people of South Korea and Thailand after a plane crash killed 179 people. 2 crew members have been rescued, but all other people have been killed. The youngest victim was a 3-year-old boy, according to local media outlets, and 5 of those killed were children under the age of 10. It's understood the Boeing 737-800 jet was making a second attempt at a crash landing after its landing gear failed to open. Former airline pilot Emma Henderson spoke to GB News earlier about the events that led to the crash.
Seems to have suffered a catastrophic bird strike, which might sound nothing in the scheme of things, but actually, when you consider the powerful engines on board, any bird strike is very critical in a case like this. And that triggered a chain of events where the pilots could not keep in control. They could not deploy the landing gear in time. And then they ran out of runway effectively at that point. They skidded off the runway and they ran right into a wall. They have recovered one of the black boxes. Once they've recovered both black boxes, the investigation will begin properly.
Meanwhile, the Azerbaijan Airlines plane that crashed, killing 38 people, was damaged while over Russia due to shooting from the ground, according to the country's president. President Aliyev said he regretted that some circles in Russia had tried to hush up the truth about the crash by sowing false narratives about the causes. It comes after Russia's President Vladimir Putin apologised for what he called a tragic incident over Russia, in which the Azerbaijan Airlines plane crashed after Russian air defences were fired against Ukrainian drones. The UK has rejected Putin's apology and called for a full and independent investigation. In other news, at least 3 people have died attempting to cross the Channel in small boats this morning. A large-scale rescue operation off the coast of Calais began early this morning after reports around 50 people had struggled to board a boat. Officials confirmed 3 people had died and 45 others had been rescued, with 4 being taken to hospital with hypothermia. The death toll could rise, according to authorities. It comes after news yesterday that 1,300 migrants have now crossed the English Channel since Christmas Day. The Prime Minister has promised to smash the gangs behind the crossings, but more than 22,000 people have arrived since he took office. That's up 25% on last year. And thick fog is set to cause further flight delays today, disrupting Gatwick Airport's busiest day of the holiday period. Flights at Stansted Airport were affected by the weather conditions yesterday, while live departure boards showed delays at Heathrow, Luton and Manchester airports. The UK's main air traffic control provider said temporary air restrictions will continue today as airfields are affected by the fog. Those are the latest GB News headlines. More in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Hello there, welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. As we see at 2024, the weather is certainly turning increasingly unsettled. For some of us, it could potentially turn very windy, especially over the New Year period. Out there at the moment, we still have high pressure across the south, keeping things settled here, but already weather fronts are moving into Scotland, giving a wet afternoon here, especially for western parts of the country. Also quite windy here too. Further south, a much brighter day than we have seen of late. We have lost that mist and the murk. Some sunshine around, but still a fair bit of cloud too. But in the brightness, much milder than it has been. Could see highs reaching around 10 to 12 degrees. A closer look into this afternoon across western Scotland, and it's just really going to be a thoroughly wet affair here. Some of that rain heavy, especially across the high ground. To the east of it, maybe a little bit of shelter, so maybe some dry spells here, but certainly a dry end to the day for Northern Ireland and Northern England, albeit rather cloudy, but still some late glimmers of sunshine to be had further south across South Wales and southern England. Moving into the evening, if anything, that rain across Scotland continues to intensify. Could see some cold air beginning to engage with that rain as well, so could see some snow, especially across the higher ground. Warnings do come into effect throughout Monday and actually right throughout New Year's Eve too. So if you do have any pre-Hogmanay travel plans across Scotland, do stay up to date with the latest warnings. But a quiet night elsewhere and fairly mild. So moving into Monday, a wet and tricky day really across Scotland. That rain moving into parts of Northern Ireland and Northern England too, but further south, largely dry. Quite a lot of cloud around though, but there will be some glimmers of sunshine, and for most of us, another mild day. But can you see that cold air beginning to just spread a little bit further south across Scotland?
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the weekend with me, Darren Grimes. Lots of you very animated about farmers in the inbox. Thank you very much for getting involved there. I'll get to some of those in a moment. But we want to turn now to that Daily Mail exclusive centred around Kemi Badenoch's ongoing feud with Nigel Farage, as it's reported that the Tory leader urged GB News to cut airtime given to Reform's leader. Now, Badenoch is alleged to have accused this very broadcaster of offering a haven for her critics, mentioning Farage's prominence on the channel and possible regulatory issues. The Mail reports that in return, it was agreed the Tory leader would appear more on the channel. The feud kicked off during the festive period when Nigel Farage said Reform members had surpassed the number of Conservative Party members. And one of our viewers, Grumpy Grandad, a good friend of the show, says, I think anyone that comes on GB News gets a fair hearing. They only have a hard time if they don't stick to the facts, if they're not backing up what they say, and that goes for anyone from any party. So that's Grumpy Grandad's view. Let's see what my panel make of this. The former Labour advisor Paul Richards and the deputy editor of Spiked, Fraser Myers. I mean, Paul, the fact of the matter is, I don't think I agree with much of what you have to say, but we let you say it on this channel, right? You are...
Absolutely.
Do you feel unencumbered?
I come on this to support the Labour Party and put forward a Labour perspective so people out there can make their own minds up. And I think it's only fair that that's allowed to happen.
And are you censored in any way? Are you given the Farage-East line?
I'm not censored, and nor do I get a text from some Labour spin doctor in advance of this telling me what to say either. I come and just say the truth as I see it, and then we have a debate and an argument and a back and forth, don't we? And that is what it should be all about. I mean, Kemi's strategy here is really questionable, I think, of picking a fight with somebody who is an insurgent. And she's the leader of the opposition and, supposedly the person who wants to be Prime Minister. Why she's picking a fight with Reform, who have 5 seats, is beyond me, because all it does is to elevate them and to get them into the news, and that's now the talking point people are talking about. It's in that fallow period of Christmas where there's not much stories from the political world going on, so it's a much bigger story than it could have been. And who is advising her? If I was a political strategist on that side of the aisle, I'd be saying, for heaven's sake, just be quiet about this. Don't go on about it.
Well, Fraser, my argument would be that actually what the Conservatives have allowed is a vacuum to be created in which they're not doing much in the way of opposition. There's certainly no policy there. So it's allowed the media circus, as it were, and I could include myself in said circus, to actually look to reform to fill that void.
Yeah, I mean, it is striking, actually, if you just look at, say, the activity in Parliament, how many questions Reform are putting forward, how much airtime they're generating, how many policy announcements they're making, and they are very successfully, taking the airtime, generating column inches, and Kemi Badenoch isn't, which is surprising because she is someone who is interesting. She always has an interesting point of view. She is someone that, if lots of focus groups say about her, they don't know her, but they always want to hear more from her because she's not a predictable, middle-of-the-road, bland politician. But she hasn't actually been able to seize the initiative so far. She's only been in for a while. I don't think anyone would have said by this stage, Keir Starmer did not look like a Prime Minister in waiting by this stage in his... Maybe even David Cameron, the only other leader of the opposition to have taken over, did not look like a Prime Minister in waiting at this stage. But, as you said, Reform are... The reason Reform are in the headlines is not just because Farage has a spot on GB News. It's because they are taking the initiative, getting themselves, taking ownership of lots of different and unexpected issues. I think it's actually...
Do you think that... Well, I don't disagree with any of that, but do you not think she's just out of her depth? I think that's what's being revealed. She was quite interesting, in the election, but now she's just not stepping up.
I think it's just such a strange thing for a leader of the opposition or the leader of any party to get so personally involved in. Normally you have a sort of Alistair Campbell figure in the background, and, let's not be naive. There are, a lot of the time on TV channels or in newspapers, you have press officers badgering editors and producers saying, when's my guy going to be on? Why haven't you been friendly to us about X, Y, Z? That's not her job to do that.
I mean, one of the comments has come in and it says that we've, at GB News, have become the Reform channel, and I don't think that's correct, because you look at I can praise Kemi Badenoch on a number of things. Her stance on being the only one to call out and say that some cultures, for example, are not compatible with British values and our way of life. Now, that is a controversial statement, but I support her and her right to say it, and I think it's a brave thing to say in the current political climate.
Now, she's not writing a newspaper column, is she? With an interesting view each week. She is leading a political party that wants to be government, and I don't think she's up to that
at the moment. Bravery in government. I think we've not had that in a very long time. So I think that if she could provide that, that's absolutely fantastic. So I'm not Reform, I'm not Conservative. When I'm on air, I am trying to give what I see as calling it as it is. And on gender, for example, she was superb, Fraser.
Yeah, and she has taken, as you say, some quite brave stances, and gender is a good example where she was actually very prescient, actually, ahead of the curve on that issue. But I think the problem is there is a sense of entitlement that comes not from necessarily Kemi herself, but from the Conservative Party. The Conservative Party thinks of itself as the natural party of government. It has, to be fair, been arguably the most successful political party in the Western democratic world. It always adapts and changes. But I think a lot of Tories think that they can simply slip in after the next election, watch Keir Starmer fail, that they have a sort of entitlement to power, when actually, some quite interesting things are happening on the right. It might be, I'm not saying that Farage is going to be Prime Minister, but, his party is now a significant player in politics and it can't easily be dismissed.
No.
And it's not just down to having a slot on GB News.
We used to call this the pendulum theory, didn't we? It would just swing back in the Tories' direction, and no reason why it should.
Absolutely, I agree. It's going to be interesting times ahead. Former Labour advisor Paul Richards and Deputy Editor of Spike Fraser-Myers. Now, a GB News spokesman says the meeting took place without any acrimony and was very constructive. A Conservative Party spokesperson told GB News, Reform has delivered a Labour government that has cruelly cut winter payments for 10 million pensioners, put the future of family farming and food security at risk, and launched a devastating raid on jobs, which will leave working people paying the price. A vote for reform this coming May is a vote for a Labour council. Only the Conservatives can stop this. All right. Lots more to come on this show, but first of all, if you're in search of some winter sun, here's the forecast for some of the top European holiday destinations.
I forecast a perfect holiday in the sun.
Weather looking good then?
For sure, and no worries about our travel insurance.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations forecast.
Hello there, welcome to your latest winter sun forecast. Well, as we see out 2024, it's going to remain fairly unsettled for parts of Cyprus and Greece. This area of cloud and rain continues to linger here. But for much of Italy, Spain and Portugal, a fairly quiet couple of days with some late winter sunshine here. A few showers for Madeira, maybe just creeping into Canaries. But as we approach New Year's Day itself, it should be fairly fine and dry across the Canaries.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations forecast.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
But it turns out there's a growing number of grandparents who are now taking up the hobby.
And not all of them are male. 7 million gamers are aged over 50, 7 million of them. And we're going to introduce you to one this morning. Her name's Kath Bowie. She's 76 years of age, and Kath has become a worldwide star of the game Fortnite. Good to see you, Kath.
Hello, good morning to both of you.
Morning. And tell me this, Kath, is Bowie your real name?
Bowie. Yeah.
Bowie.
Yes, it is my real name, yes.
And you do it a Bowie and not a Bowie?
It's a Bowie, yes, definitely Bowie, yes.
Bowie or Bowie?
Bowie.
Bowie.
But that's not what the Jim Bowie was called, or Jim Bowie was called in the Alamo. He was a Bowie.
No, but that's what I'm called, Kath Bowie.
Oh,
She's their own superstar.
You are your own superstar. You are indeed. Well, so we're led to believe, Kath, that there's nobody else like you, or very few people like you, but there is. There is lots of people your age, your stage, doing what you do.
Yes, there's not a lot that streams. Okay, Fortnite, but there's definitely plenty that plays. Any game, you know what I mean? It doesn't have to be Fortnite. It can be any game.
So Kath, how did you get started in all of this?
Oh, yeah, well, it's 7 years ago, actually. I walked into my teenage grandson's bedroom and just saw him playing what I now know, of course, and what I play is Fortnite. And that was the very first week that Epic had released it. And it was just really love at first sight.
GB News, the People's Channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the weekend with me, Darren Grimes. Now, yellow weather warnings have been issued as we approach the new year, with the fog that's covered large swathes of the country lifting, and it's been replaced by snow and heavy rain. Could adverse weather dampen your New Year's Eve plans? Well, let's pose that question to the weather journalist Nathan Rao, who joins me now. Nathan, thank you very much for your company as ever, my friend. How wet should we expect it to be?
Well, Darren, I'm glad that you had Craig on just a minute ago telling us all how lovely it was going to be in the Canaries, because I am here to tell you it is going to be a very, very different picture here. Very safe to say that the storm season is about to get a very lively awakening, with quite a vicious system coming in starting tomorrow and then going into New Year's Eve, starting in Scotland, which is not good news for Hogmanay and New Year's Eve celebrations in Scotland, and then moving across and down the country, bringing strong winds, heavy rain, and the possibility of snow and plunging temperatures right through New Year's Eve, New Year's Day, and into the start of 2025. So after a very, very mild and calm Christmas period, I think it's safe to say that the calm before the storm is over, and that this is possibly going to be the first real taste of winter that we're going to get right across the UK. So, Darren, not good news, I'm afraid.
Yeah, to be honest with you, though, Nathan, I mean, this fog, how widespread has it actually been thus far? Because I got some emails in saying in my part of the world, in the northeast, it was clear as day.
Yeah, and it was. And it's very funny because I was talking to one of your guys yesterday on your show, in the morning show, about the fog, and where I was, it was perfectly clear. However, that said, the parts of the country that were hit by fog were very badly hit by fog. And as we all heard about, lots of planes were grounded and motorways, the visibility was dropped. The thing with fog, it's formed when temperatures drop very quickly overnight, where there's been humidity and milder temperature during the day. And that can happen very, very quickly, and it can happen anywhere. And it's very, very difficult to pinpoint exactly where that's going to happen. So you could go to sleep under very clear skies and wake up the next morning under a thick fog of something looks like it's out of a horror movie. Very, very difficult to pinpoint. But you're quite right. Lots of people, I heard the same thing, were saying, where is all this we've heard about? It's nowhere. And other places were very badly hit.
Well, remember your brolly for New Year's Eve. That's what we've got to do. All right, Nathan Rao there, thank you very much for your company as ever. Now, folks, speaking of New Year's celebrations, you can join GB News for the ultimate countdown to 2025. Bev, Patrick, Emily, Ben and some fella called Darren Grimes. I've never heard of him. We'll all be together for a very special show. GB News New Year's Live from 10 p.m. on New Year's Eve. Don't miss it. You're with me, Darren Grimes, on GB News. Lots more coming up on the show. First of all, your weather with Craig.
Heavy showers first thing will be followed by a warm, cosy day. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. Well, as we move into 2025, the weather is certainly turning much more unsettled across the country. A risk of some disruption in places as areas of low pressure move in. But at the moment, we still have high pressure across the south, keeping things fairly settled here. But weather fronts already providing plenty of rain across Scotland. And if anything, as we go through the course of the evening, that rain intensifies across parts of Scotland. Also, could just see some snow beginning to fall across the higher ground. Further south, a fairly quiet night to come, albeit rather cloudy, but that cloud cover will generally give us a fairly mild night. Although some clearer skies across the very far south, we could see lows here of around 3 to 5 degrees. So if we start Monday morning across Scotland, it's going to be a wet and potentially snowy start for some of us. Warnings are in force right throughout Monday, and that will continue into New Year's Eve and potentially New Year's Day too. So if you do have any Hogmanay travel plans, do stay up to date with the latest warnings. The rain also beginning to move into parts of Northern Ireland and Northern England too, but The further south you are, generally a dry start with maybe a few glimmers of sunshine. But for most of us, really, it's going to be a fairly cloudy Monday. The best of any brightness really will be reserved across the far south. But even here, we could just see a few showers develop. But for Scotland especially, a very wet picture here, although the far northwest may well just turn a little bit drier as we move into the afternoon. Mild for most of us, but up across the far north, we're just starting to see this cold air just begin to move a bit further south. So a pretty cold afternoon to come for much of northern Scotland. Into the evening, another band of rain then begins to move into Scotland, so turning wet once again with, risk of some snow in places. Remaining fairly quiet for the time being across the south, but for all of us, as we move into 2025, it's turning unsettled with the risk of some wind, rain and potentially snow.
Expect a warm front, moving from the kitchen right through to the rest of the house. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
There's still plenty of time to grab your chance to win our biggest cash prize ever, an incredible £50,000. What would you spend £50,000 on in the coming year? Spectacular holidays, a brand new car, home improvements, or maybe you'd just like to save it for a special occasion? For another chance to win, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. You can call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Or post your name and number to GB10 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 31st of January. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Now, our next guests have been working closely with celebrities and MPs to help clean up our planet.
Very important. Think Ocean was founded in 2021 with two main goals. One, educating the next generation to make sure that they know when they're growing up that naturally we have to take care of the planet and cleaning pollution that's already in the environment.
Well, joining us now to tell us more is Think Ocean's founder, Hugo Valdez-Vera, and the co-founder, Nolene Mariappan. Really good
morning,
to see you both this morning. So, Nolene, let's start with you. What is Think Ocean and why did you want to start this back in 2021?
Yes, so Hugo had actually been working on the environment and climate action for quite a long time. When he moved to the UK, he realised that there was a growing problem with plastic pollution and that more needed to be done because people weren't actually seeing the link between plastic, the impact on the environment and climate change. So he founded the organisation and I joined him with 3 goals, really. Education, looking at technology to scale solutions, and looking at how we develop more circular economy programs. So actually looking at reusing, recycling, actually creating local economies from what people would consider waste.
Hugo, just how bad is plastic pollution around the world, and especially here in the UK?
Well, it is bad, but we don't know the extent of how bad it is. You know, this is not much interest from the bigger players or, some government for us to know every detail of the pollution. So if we know that is from 1 to 10 is 2, probably it's about 6.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Good afternoon. It's 2 o'clock on Sunday, the 29th of December. This is The Weekend on GB News. At least 179 people have died after a plane crash landed and collided with a wall at South Korea's Muan International Airport in the early hours of this morning. I'll be speaking to an airline pilot in the next few minutes. French authorities have confirmed that 3 migrants have died and dozens rescued after a small boat capsized in the English Channel. It comes after GB News revealed yesterday that 1,300 small boats had made the perilous journey since Christmas Day. And the fog on the Tyne might be all fine, but the fog that's covered large swathes of the country has finally begun to clear, only to be replaced by snow and rain as we welcome in the new year. Just how much of a damp squib might it be in the early start of 2025? I'm Darren Grimes, and this is The Weekend. Now, my friends, this show is absolutely nothing without you and your views. Let me know your thoughts. You're a rowdy bunch, I know it. On all of the stories we'll be discussing today, get involved by visiting gbnews.com/your say. Join that conversation. Keeping me company on the show is the former Labour advisor Paul Richards and the deputy editor of Spiked, Fraser Myers. But before we get stuck into today's stories, here's the news headlines with Sophia Wensler.
Darren, thank you. Good afternoon. It's just gone 2 o'clock. These are your headlines from the GB newsroom. Foreign Secretary David Lammy has offered his heartfelt condolences to the people of South Korea and Thailand after a plane crash killed 179 people. 2 crew members have been rescued, but all other people on board have been killed. The youngest victim was a 3-year-old boy, according to local media outlets, and 5 of those killed were children under the age of 10. It's understood that Boeing 737-800 jet was making a second attempt at a crash landing after its landing gear failed to open. Travel and aviation expert Sally Gethin spoke to GB News earlier about the events that led to the crash.
Seems to have suffered a catastrophic bird strike, which might sound nothing in the scheme of things, but actually, when you consider the powerful engines on board, any bird strike is very critical in a case like this. And that triggered a chain of events where the pilots could not keep in control. They could not deploy the landing gear in time. And then they ran out of runway effectively at that point. They skidded off the runway and they ran right into a wall. They have recovered one of the black boxes. Once they've recovered both black boxes, the investigation will begin properly.
Meanwhile, the Azerbaijan Airlines plane that crashed, killing 38 people, was damaged while over Russia due to shooting from the ground, according to the country's president. President Aliyev said he regretted that some circles in Russia had tried to hush up the truth about the crash by sowing false narratives about the causes. It comes after Russia's President Vladimir Putin apologised for what he called a tragic incident over Russia, in which the Azerbaijan Airlines plane crashed after Russian air defences were fired against Ukrainian drones. The UK has rejected Putin's apology and called for a full and independent investigation. In other news, at least 3 people have died attempting to cross the Channel in small boats this morning. A large-scale rescue operation off the coast of Calais began early this morning after reports around 50 people had struggled to board a boat. Officials confirmed 3 people had died and 45 others had been rescued, with 4 being taken to hospital with hypothermia. The death toll could rise, according to authorities. It comes after news yesterday that 1,300 migrants have now crossed the English Channel since Christmas Day. The Prime Minister has promised to smash the gangs behind the crossings, but more than 22,000 people have arrived since he took office. That's up 25% on last year. The Prime Minister's approval ratings have been branded catastrophic with rural voters in a new poll following the planned tax raid on farmers. New polling by The Telegraph suggests just 1 in 5 believe Labour cares about people who live and work in the countryside. It's understood Sir Keir Starmer has been warned his ratings have suffered a catastrophic fall among countryside voters angered by his family farm tax. Meanwhile, the UK has pledged millions of pounds more to Ukraine to help investigate Russian war crimes. The Ministry of Defence announced it will give bodies, including the Ukrainian Prosecutor General's office, £4.5 million to help bring Russian war criminals to justice. The government had previously pledged £6.2 million to help prosecute war crimes. The UN concluded in 2022 that war crimes had been committed during the conflict, citing evidence of executions, torture and sexual and gender-based violence. And thick fog is setting to cause further flight delays today, disrupting Gatwick Airport's busiest day of the holiday period. Flights at Stansted Airport were affected by the weather conditions yesterday, while live departure boards showed delays at Heathrow, Luton and Manchester airports. The UK's main air traffic control provider said temporary air restrictions will continue today as airfields are affected by the fog. Those are the latest GB News headlines. Now it's back to Darren.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you very much. Super Sophia there. She's great, isn't she? Let's get stuck into today's topics. Now, 179 people have died after a plane crash-landed and collided with a wall at South Korea's Muan International Airport in the early hours of this morning. It's according to local transport officials. The jet was arriving from the Thai capital, Bangkok, and it was carrying 175 passengers and 6 crew members, only 2 of whom have somehow miraculously been recovered from this awful wreckage. Now, the authorities have cited a malfunction of landing gear as a possible cause of the crash, but have also revealed that a bird strike warning was in place at the time. I don't know about you, but I had never heard of a bird strike before today. This is all news to me, and it's a horrific incident to have taken place. The recovery effort is continuing, with the Yonhap news agency reporting that the search has now shifted to recovering the bodies. Well, joining me now is the former airline pilot, Emma Henderson, MBE. Emma, thank you very much for your company and for offering your time and insight. Emma, I don't wish for us to speculate too much on the cause, but in your view, as you told us earlier today, you know, over 100,000 flights flying and landing safely today, so we shouldn't get too alarmist about these things, should we?
Definitely not. And I'm pleased to hear you say that, because obviously when something like this happens, it's big news, because a lot of people have lost their lives tragically. And the ensuing investigation will be what finds out the exact cause of that. So any speculation about what happened needs to really be kept to one side, because none of us know. And you're absolutely right. There will be people watching this who are thinking, well, I can never fly again. If that's happened to that aircraft, it must be going to happen to mine. And I just want to reassure people that that's absolutely not the case. Over 100,000 flights take place every single day, and they take off, they fly to their destination, and they land safely. And I think that we do need a little bit of perspective on this, despite the fact that so many people have lost their lives. It doesn't mean it's going to happen on your flight. And actually, after this, I'm driving to the airport to put my daughter on a flight back to London. That's how confident I am that flying is safe.
Emma, what do you take from the understanding of one attempted landing? So if you put yourself in a scenario, in an isolated case, I don't mean in this specific example, because I don't want to get into speculation, but if you had attempted to land a plane and had managed that unsuccessfully, and then a catastrophic event like this had taken place, is that suggesting a failure of the aircraft itself?
It's very difficult to tell. So if you're unable to complete a landing successfully, you would perform what we call a go-around, where you set full thrust and you take off back into the air again, sometimes with the wheels touching the ground, sometimes not. And that's not an uncommon thing to happen. Sometimes it can happen because there's traffic on the runway ahead of you. Sometimes it can happen because there has been a bird strike ahead of you. And that has happened to me. So I've been coming back into Gatwick in the past, where I've been coming into land, and air traffic control have told me to do a go around because the landing aircraft ahead of me has hit a bird and the debris needs to be picked up from the runway before it's safe for any other aircraft to land again. So that's not an unusual thing to happen. So that the actual attempted landing, I don't know what the reasons for that were. It's a standard thing for any pilot to assume. We don't actually assume we're going to land successfully. We assume we're going to perform a go-around, because then there's no startle effect, and we're able to manage that. And remember, we train for this all the time. So although we may not put it into practice every day, we train in the simulator twice a year, and we're really put through our paces with making sure that we know how to make decisions and how to handle what we call abnormal and emergency situations.
Emma, is there a conflict here, a tension between biodiversity aims, so encouraging, of course, wildlife, including birds, and actually the safety of airports near where birds may be? I mean, how much of a risk? I had never considered the risk of a bird to a plane, but because you consider the size of the two things compared to each other.
Absolutely.
But it's severe.
And it's interesting. Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting, isn't it? Because most people wouldn't think about that, because why would you? Because, you know, what you see when you turn up at an airport is you see the bit where you check your bags in, the bit where you go and eat something before you get on the aircraft, and then getting onto the plane itself. And most people don't think about what's going on around them. But airports are massive, flat, quite quiet, apart from the aircraft taking off, otherwise undisturbed pieces of land. And birds love that because they aren't disturbed. There's a lot of pest control there. And actually, airports invest a lot of time and money in keeping birds away from airports in as sustainable a way as they can. So mostly by keeping the grass really short, so that it's not an enticing place for birds to want to nest and lots of flocks of birds to live. But, you know, birds do share airspace with aircraft. They are softer than aircraft. And I have taken a bird down an engine coming out of Corfu before.
Wow.
And there's a process you go through. It's not a very nice thing to happen, but there's a process you go through. And flying is very process driven. And, you know, we find out what information we can from all the available sources. And then we deal with that problem having risk assessed it. So in my case, in the case coming out of Corfu, I made everything was working fine. We took a bit of time to make sure we could establish the aircraft was flying as it should be, and we made sure we had potential diversion airfields to fly into all the way back to London, which we went back to London safely. Mm-hmm. So when something like that happens, whatever the reason was for the initial landing to be aborted, there will have been a process that was being followed. And then if something else happened after that, then that's new information that's come into the flight deck. And we will find out pretty quickly, I think. I mean, they've got the black box record. We'll find out very quickly what actually happened and how that can be prevented from happening in the future. If there will be lessons to learn from this. And that's the whole thing about aviation, is we learn from these things, and new procedures will be implemented if they are required.
And Emma, I found out today that the black boxes are actually orange, which threw me off. Yeah, I'm finding out all sorts of things today, Emma, I tell you. Emma, thank you very much for your time today. That's the former airline pilot, Emma Henderson, MBE. Now, French authorities, my friends, have confirmed that 3 migrants have sadly died and dozens have been rescued after a small boat capsized whilst attempting to cross the English Channel from France. It comes after GBNews revealed yesterday that 1,300 small boats had made the perilous journey since Christmas Day alone. Now, let's see what my panel make of this. The former Labour advisor, Paul Richards, and the deputy editor of Spiked, Fraser Myers. Fraser, Spike's chronicled this issue for a number of years now. You know, if you go back to 2018, do you think that actually the problem here is that there simply isn't enough of a deterrent effect and people are still making this really awful journey?
Yeah, I think, first of all, it's really important to say that we can't let tragedies like this, the loss of 3 people's lives, it's becoming almost like normal news. You know, you hear about these deaths and then we move on very quickly, and it's a really, really terrible tragedy. Yeah, I think one of the problems is, and perhaps this is something that Starmer is not addressing, is that when you arrive in the UK illegally, it's very, very difficult to be deported. So the incentives are all in the direction of, well, just come over, try it, see if you can get into the black economy, perhaps you can claim asylum. I'm very much in favour of people being able to claim asylum, people coming from war-torn countries. I think we've done an excellent job in inviting people from Hong Kong who are facing CCP repression, lots of people from Ukraine coming over, lots of people from Afghanistan and places like that. But, you know, a lot of claims are bogus, frankly, and even when they're found out to be bogus, either they're told they're denied asylum, but they sort of fade into the black economy, we don't really do anything about it, or they're simply not allowed to be deported on human rights grounds. And I think that is something that has to change if we're going to stop people from making this perilous journey. Because, you know, we don't want to be a closed country. We want people to come over to fill certain jobs, you know, especially if they have the right skills for us. But we also don't want to be in a situation where the border is uncontrolled, we don't know who's coming in, and even when sometimes, you know, they are not the people we want to be here, we can't get rid of them either.
Because, Paul, the situation that we're in at the minute is you see, even though we have a returns agreement, excuse me, a returns agreement with Albania, you see Albanian gangs advertising on TikTok, this was in the Times yesterday or the day before, advertising on TikTok package deals to come to Britain. Well, Albanians, you know, they get sent back, but they're still doing it. So even when the returns agreements are there, still proving quite hard.
I mean, I don't blame any of those poor souls on those boats taking this perilous, dangerous and ultimately tragic route at all. I blame the scumbags who put them on the boats in the first place, and they are being promised things that aren't going to be delivered. They are often being ripped off and being paid to, you know, huge amounts of money over to these gangs. So Labour's slogan, "Smash the gangs," is it a slogan, but also it's a strategy, because that's the way you stop this, is to disrupt it upstream. So stop those boats ever even reaching the channel in the first place, so disrupting the supply of the boats, spending more time on intelligence activities to disrupt the gangs and the people behind the gangs who are making fortunes from this. I would also go after the hoteliers in the UK that are profiteering out of it too, and actually disrupt the business model. You know, by the time they're on a boat and they're in the channel, it's too late.
Yeah. Well, Fraser, I mean, the fact of the matter is there is a great deal of anger and resentment out there, and I would argue that it's actually damaging faith in democracy, because people keep voting for robust controls and they get the complete opposite.
Every party that's won an election in the last God knows how many years has promised to reduce immigration, both legal and illegal, and every time it seems as if the opposite happens. So, yeah, that is creating a huge gap between breach of trust in between politicians, the whole political class, and particularly the Conservative Party as well, because, you know, they ran so explicitly on reducing migration to the tens of thousands, and we saw instead net migration hitting 1.2 million, which is just absolutely extraordinary. I think I agree. Obviously, we do need to do something about the gangs, but I'm not convinced that it's sufficient. It's a little bit like the war on drugs, you know. Let's be honest, the drugs have won. The problem there is that people enjoy them. You know, the incentives are too good.
Well, some would argue that we haven't even really seriously attempted the war on drugs.
There's always, you know, that way of looking at it as well. But I think, you know,
so have we really attempted border controls? Have
we really? Probably not. But I think, you know, if you don't deal with the incentives, the system will carry on as it is. You know, the gangs. You know, there's a reason that the gangs are able to profit from this. And simply disrupting the crime is not enough. Well, it's necessary, but it's not enough.
There are reasons they're doing that, because the pull factors are so great, right? We continue to guarantee people bed, board and benefits if they come here, and then some of them go off into the black economy. I'm afraid until I would actually create detention centres in which you can't leave them, right? Because I think that the freedom to roam, as it were, is a good pull incentive.
I think it's very difficult, isn't it? Because there will be perhaps 50% of those people at least, or maybe less, I don't know, will have actually a right to claim asylum or to be a refugee.
Too many.
But that you don't want to. Those are the people you don't want to have then ended up detaining for a year. Well, so it's a very difficult thing balance to strike.
Well, they're in France, though, Fraser. You know,
I agree with that as well. But you know, sorry.
No, not at all. OK, we'll come back to Fraser and we'll come back to Paul in just a second. For all the best analysis and opinion on that story and more, you can go to our website. We're at gbnews.com. You're with me, Darren Grimes, on GB News. Lots more coming up in today's show. In just a minute, we'll be live on a dairy farm in Scotland, and I will pronounce it correctly this time. You've all put me in my place for an exclusive insight into the never-ending toil that farmers do have to endure even throughout the festive period, especially throughout the festive period. All of that and more to come. You're with GB News, we're Britain's news channel.
Nana Queer, weekends from 3 p.m.
Today I am joined by documentary maker Daniel Wing, who is still trying to find out who murdered his mother 30 years on. He's also created a documentary called Who Murdered You, Mum? Daniel, can you just tell us the story of what happened to your mother, what you know?
So when I was 1 year old in 1992, my mum Tina was murdered. My dad went on trial for it and was acquitted, and the case went unsolved and has been unsolved for 32 years. My nan, who raised me, amazing woman, passed away sadly 2 years ago, and that kind of sent me on a quest for answers.
So your documentary then, what are you hoping to achieve with it?
I am fighting for justice for my mum. I have had a meeting with the police and they are looking to see what they have and are looking to reopen investigation if they can find new and compelling evidence. What's interesting now is speaking to other families who are actually going through the trauma and experience of murder.
Yeah.
My mum didn't get the opportunity to be a mum. What would my life have been? I'm now 33 years old with no parents. And it's that kind of thing. It's a very, I guess, lonely journey in what I'm experiencing. That's why I wanted to make this film, because I hadn't had the opportunity to be able to grieve my mother and know who she was. And that was really what this journey was about. It was about finding out who she was and being able to grieve. Everyone had the opportunity, although terrible circumstances, to be able to go to the funeral and have that moment, and I never had that opportunity.
The People's Channel.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more. Whether it's breaking royal news, Will, please bring us up to date, or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons.
Very, very curious.
We bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent? I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to The Weekend with me, Darren Grimes. Now, the Prime Minister's approval ratings have been branded catastrophic among rural voters in a new damning poll, following that planned raid, of course, on farmers via taxation. Despite being hit with this Labour inheritance tax, many family farms continue to fight on against the modern-day challenges facing the industry, vast in number. Let's cross to the Scottish town of Morecambe in Ayrshire right now to speak to our Scotland reporter, Tony Maguire. Tony, you've been having quite the day, getting your hat really stuck in there, mucking in, literally. So what have you found out about the plight of our farmers in our rural communities?
Yeah, good afternoon again. Well, you know, it's been such a really interesting day here to actually kind of get onto a farm and to talk to the farmer and the staff as well about kind of the implications of that all-important budget really at the end of October. We're about 3 months now. Since then, you know, things are starting to kind of settle in, and they're all now looking ahead to 2025 and what may or may not happen then. Now, there's really two big parts of this that we kind of need to address here. One is, of course, the politics. This was a huge budget with implications for farmers reaching far beyond either you or I can possibly imagine. It will affect big farms more, but even small farms are looking ahead and wondering, you know, what their future is going to look like and what their succession plan is going to look like. And in many ways, it's affected communities all across the country, and especially here in Ayrshire, there are dozens of farms, not quite like this one now. And I was welcomed here by Bryce Cunningham, and I must say the level of ingenuity and, you know, the willingness to experiment and to push further. Bryce, he described Mossgiel Farm, where I am just now, and his cows here, he only has 12 milking cows, but he describes it as a tiny farm, not even a small farm, but he's been part of a bigger cooperative, and together they're hoping to be able to find strength going into these difficult months ahead. But to bring it back, the real reason why I'm here today is because I feel like we need to go back to actually connect with our farms and our farmers, to actually be boots on the ground, if you like, or wellies in my case today, and to speak to them and find out, you know, who it is that we are getting, you know, quite upset over with all these changes coming in. Now, I spoke to Bryce a little earlier on today, and he was telling me about his rather ingenious recipe for milk.
Back when I first created Mossgiel Milk, what I wanted to do was create a milk that tasted exactly the same way as what Robert Burns would have drank a couple of hundred years ago, right in this farm. Yeah, there's your cows, the same grass, the same weather, the same farm, and that's what I wanted to recreate. Now, when we started to get bigger and we started to grow the business, that low temperature pasteurisation way became quite impossible to operate. It was really slow, it was really difficult and really inefficient, so we created our own way of brewing milk instead, and that allows us to upscale to do very similar volumes to the bigger dairies, but keep the milk in this really unique way where you can taste the milk as if it was raw, but it is pasteurised for the Scottish law, so that's what the milk's all about.
Right.
Lots of face in social media. They used to have a matter of pride as to how straight and pointy the horns and the cows were. Nowadays, you know, you see them nowadays where they're a bit all wonky all over the place, but you know, Mary's is probably the most perfect ones we have in the herd. We haven't done that, by the way, that's just how it's come out naturally.
Now, you know, one of the highlights for me today was actually just seeing the birth of a small calf, you know, 30 minutes old, and it was just learning to suckle for the first time. You know, you don't really forget something like that. But honestly, seeing how hard Bryce, his family and his whole team work, I think I would want a wee calf every now and again as well if I worked as hard as these guys.
No, absolutely, Tony. And they are the unsung heroes of our country, really, because of the fact that they live in these rural communities. And I don't think we do enough to support them and admire what it is they do. So thank you for documenting that, Tony, in Morclin in Ayrshire there. Right, let's see what my panel make of this. Former Labour advisor Paul Richards and the deputy editor of Spiked, Fraser Myers. Fraser, do you suspect Labour thought this through? As in, do you think they thought that there was enough of a outpouring of love and admiration for farming communities than, you know, there clearly is?
I think they sort of saw the numbers on a spreadsheet. They thought, oh, it only affects perhaps it looks like it will only affect a small number of farmers this year or next calendar year or in a few years ahead. Raise a small amount of money, what could possibly go wrong? I think, especially considering that it is only due to raise, I think, about half £5 billion, which is not a lot of money in the grand scheme of things. I think it is a big mistake. I think they didn't quite appreciate how important it is to have family farms. I mean, this is not just any old business. You know, you live on the farm. It's the kind of business that most people don't aspire to be a farmer unless they're from a farming family. Yeah. It is a generational thing. And I think there's a failure to grasp that, which meant that they didn't see the anger that they're creating. And I think a lot of people, even if they're not farmers, So, you know, it's not just that, of course, this doesn't affect all farmers, but even many people who live in rural areas who are not farmers feel a great deal of sympathy over this. I think they understand it better than the government does, and they see, you know, there's a lot of solidarity, I think, with farmers in those areas.
Paul, the viewers that are emailing in right now, you know, they're talking about issues like the $5 billion that we're spending on asylum now and the hotel costs that are growing what seems like by the minute. Obviously, I'm exaggerating there, but they are growing by the day at least. And ultimately, if you consider that £5 billion, as Fraser says, you're raising peanuts from these farmers, so why bother?
Well, that farm on your report there from Tony Maguire isn't going to be affected by the changes. Most farms are not impacted by the changes. That farm perhaps is a good model, actually, of a cooperative where they're going to use different models of ownership to do their business. And I think that, you know, talking about the farmers, most farmers are not actually impacted at all. So the question is, why are they clogging up the streets with tractors, and why are there militant farming organisations coming to London and trying to disrupt the government? It's because they don't like the government. It's nothing to do with this specific tax, which doesn't even affect most of the people on the demos. I'm old enough to remember people going down to London to complain about fox hunting being banned, and, you know, the Countryside Alliance putting 1 million people on the street. These are communities who don't like Labour very much, and that's the reality of it.
Well, I'm not surprised they don't, if you're doing this to them.
But we're not doing it to them. That's the whole point. It's a tiny number. And as I said before, many of these people actually directly affected. It's a tax dodge. They're not real farmers at all.
Well, they disagree that it's all Jeremy Clarkson's or Lord Dyson's. I've just given them a peerage. Sir James Dyson of the world.
Unlikely anytime soon, I suspect.
Yeah, well, and Martin has written in, and Martin says, raise 500,000 from our farmers and give 500,000 to foreign farmers. This government care nothing for our rural communities.
I suppose, what is this in relation to international foreign aid? Look, I mean, the issue is that a lot of farmers out there they might be asset rich, but they're cash poor. They're not, you know, of course, this does create a loophole, as you say, for certain people to put their land, to buy land and to be able to pass it on and to pretend that they have a farm. Well, we should absolutely be cracking down on that tax loophole. But that doesn't change the fact that this is going to affect a lot of ordinary farmers who are not wealthy, who are not lords of the manor, and who, you know, frankly, are probably working for below minimum wage if you take into account the amount of hours and the incredibly unsocial hours that they have to do to to put food on the table.
I mean, yes, I agree with all of that, and I'm glad that actually this tax has raised awareness of just how difficult things are for farmers who, you know...
No one's disagreeing with that. Well, they do a great job. No one's saying that...
I mean, I'm afraid to say that I think Labour are, actually, and I think this is a deliberate attempt to actually seize land, because you're ultimately going to have to sell it off in order to pay for this.
Disagree. And there are mechanisms whereby they don't have to do that, even if they're in that dire situation. They're still paying less tax on inheritance tax than the rest of us. It's a lower rate, even after the changes.
Yeah, but the rest of us aren't farming the nation's food, and as Fraser says, struggling in the most...
No, but they are working in the National Health Service, or, you know, driving trains, whatever it might be. I mean, yeah, we all...
Driving trains, they get 70 grand for pushing a button.
Good.
No, absolutely not. I think that shows Labour's priorities, that's all I can say. Right, former Labour advisor there, Paul Richards, and deputy editor of Spiked, Fraser Myers. Thank you to the two of you. You're with me, Darren Grimes, on GB News, with plenty more to come on today's show. I'm taking a look at the various whirlwind royal tours that have taken place throughout the year, from Australia to Samoa to South Africa. Before any of that, though, here's your news headlines with Sophia Wensler.
Darren, thank you. These are your headlines at 2:32. Foreign Secretary David Lammy has offered his condolences to the people of South Korea and Thailand after a plane crash killed 179 people there. 2 crew members have been rescued, but all the other people on board have been killed. The youngest victim was a 3-year-old boy, according to local media outlets, and 5 of those killed were children under the age of 10. It's understood the Boeing 737-800 jet was making a second attempt at a crash landing after its landing gear failed to open. Travel and aviation expert Sally Gethin spoke to GB News earlier about the events that led to the crash.
Seems to have suffered a catastrophic bird strike, which might sound nothing in the scheme of things, but actually, when you consider the powerful engines on board, any bird strike is very critical in a case like this. And that triggered a chain of events where the pilots could not keep in control. They could not deploy the landing gear in time. And then they ran out of runway effectively at that point. They skidded off the runway and they ran right into a wall. They have recovered one of the black boxes. Once they've recovered both black boxes, the investigation will begin properly.
Meanwhile, the Azerbaijan Airlines plane that crashed, killing 38 people, was damaged while over Russia due to shooting from the ground, according to the country's president. President Aliyev said he regretted that some circles in Russia had tried to hush up the truth about the crash by sowing false narratives about what happened. It comes after Russia's President Putin apologised for what he called a tragic incident over Russia, in which the Azerbaijan Airlines plane crashed after Russian air defences were fired against Ukrainian drones. The UK has rejected Putin's apology and called for a full and independent investigation. Now, the government has blamed the deaths of 3 migrants in the Channel on ruthless criminals trying to overload unseaworthy boats. At least 3 people died attempting to cross the Channel in small boats this morning. A large-scale rescue operation off the coast of Calais began after reports around 50 people had struggled to board a boat. Officials confirmed 3 people had died and 45 others had been rescued, with 4 being taken to hospital with hypothermia. The death toll could rise, according to authorities there. It comes after news yesterday that 1,300 migrants have now crossed the English Channel since Christmas Day. The Prime Minister has promised to smash the gangs behind the crossings, but more than 22,000 people have arrived since he took office. That's up 25% on last year. Those are the latest GB News headlines. Sam Francis will have more for you in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Hello there, welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. As we see at 2024, the weather is certainly turning increasingly unsettled. For some of us, it could potentially turn very windy, especially over the New Year period. Out there at the moment, we still have high pressure across the south, keeping things settled here, but already weather fronts are moving into Scotland, giving a wet afternoon here, especially for western parts of the country. Also quite windy here too. Further south, a much brighter day than we have seen of late. We have lost that mist and the murk. Some sunshine around, but still a fair bit of cloud too. But in the brightness, much milder than it has been. Could see highs reaching around 10 to 12 degrees. A closer look into this afternoon across western Scotland, and it's just really going to be a thoroughly wet affair here. Some of that rain heavy, especially across the high ground. To the east of it, maybe a little bit of shelter, so maybe some drier spells here, but certainly a dry end to the day for Northern Ireland and Northern England, albeit rather cloudy, but still some late glimmers of sunshine to be had further south across South Wales and southern England. Moving into the evening, if anything, that rain across Scotland continues to intensify. Could see some cold air beginning to engage with that rain as well, so could see some snow, especially across the higher ground. Warnings do come into effect throughout Monday and actually right throughout New Year's Eve too. So if you do have any pre-Hogmanay travel plans across Scotland, do stay up to date with the latest warnings. But a quiet night elsewhere and fairly mild. So moving into Monday, a wet and tricky day really across Scotland. That rain moving into parts of Northern Ireland and Northern England too, but further south, largely dry. Quite a lot of cloud around though, but there will be some glimmers of sunshine, and for most of us, another mild day. But can you see that cold air beginning to spread a little bit further south across Scotland?
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Nana Akweer, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference
It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave. I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is the nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to The Weekend with me, Darren Grimes. Now, my friends, there's plenty more to come on today's show, but listen, if you've followed me for a while, you'll know I'm a man that loves his Nana, and especially this one too. Nana, what have you got coming up for us at 3 o'clock?
Well, I mean, there's so much to talk about. We're going to be talking about whether you think that we give Nigel Farage too much airtime. Because, you know, these are the kind of comments that are coming from Kemi Badenoch. She feels that perhaps things are unfair. But let's be honest, we're not alone in putting Nigel on ITV. Yeah. I'm a Celebrity. He was on there for a long period of time. And a lot of the other broadcasters are quite happy to denigrate and insult. So I would argue that maybe we give him the same amount of airtime as others. But you may feel that we give him too much. Then we'll look at Kemi Badenoch and ask, do you think that she's up for the job? Because should she really have picked a fight on how many membership numbers you have? Is that a little bit petty-minded, or is it a serious issue? It sounds a bit, I don't know, what do you think? We'd love to hear your thoughts. In that My Niggle at just after 4, I'll talk about the highlights, or mostly lowlights, of 2024 in the political arena. And Bridget Phillipson, is the attack, the VAT raid attack on middle classes and people who send their kids to private schools, is it actually just the politics of envy? All of that is on the way.
Brilliant stuff, Nana. We look forward to that as ever. She won't hold back. Now, my friends, members of the royal family travelled to Australia, Samoa and South Africa earlier this year, despite a gruelling, of course, 12 months of health battles. Now, His Majesty the King and the Queen spent time down under, while the Prince of Wales travelled to Cape Town for his Environmental Earthshot Prize. Our royal correspondent, Cameron Walker, has taken a look back at the royal year.
The royal family was propelled onto the global stage this year, representing brand Britain and deploying their soft power despite their private health battles. The King and Queen travelled thousands of miles to Australia, the first time His Majesty had visited as the country's head of state and the first reigning king to step foot on its soil.
Welcome to Australia. Lovely to have you here.
Partly due to the King's cancer diagnosis, the trip lasted only 6 days, visiting Sydney and Canberra. Hailed by crowds, but heckled by individuals. Senator Lydia Thorpe was widely condemned for her outburst and was symbolically censored by Australian lawmakers. Meanwhile, the King made a point of acknowledging the traditions and lives of Indigenous communities and spent time listening to their experiences. Republican protesters were kept well back by police when Their Majesties visited the Sydney Opera House. An estimated crowd of well-wishers exceeded 10,000 people. Then Their Majesties travelled more than 4,000 miles into the middle of the South Pacific to visit Samoa, first for a short state visit, followed by the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, the first time King Charles has presided over the conference as its head.
Since this is the first occasion on which I find myself attending this gathering of our family of nations as head of the Commonwealth, it gives my wife and myself enormous pleasure and pride to be with you for this 27th Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting.
I have hope and I have that optimism that these guys and girls can change our future.
Meanwhile, the Prince of Wales flew to Cape Town for his 4th annual Earthshot Prize, designed to find solutions to repair the planet in this critical decade. The first time the prize was held on the African continent, Prince William was keen to spotlight African innovation and young people. Earthshot Prize Ambassador Robert Irwin spoke to GB News.
When you think of the Earthshot Prize, instantly you think of Prince William. His devotion and his dedication to conservation is unparalleled. It is absolutely amazing. And it's so encouraging to see someone, of course, with a brilliant platform that's using that platform 100% to create positive change for our environment.
When's your next match?
Royal sources have confirmed the King will resume a more normal-looking programme of international travel next year. The Prince of Wales hopes he and the Princess of Wales will carry out more international travel too. Both households, however, are keeping tight-lipped about the destinations. Cameron Walker, GB News.
All right, let's see what my panel make of this one. Former Labour advisor Paul Richards and the deputy editor of Spiked, Fraser Myers. Fraser, I assume you say...
Sorry?
A shrug of the shoulders.
A shrug of the shoulders. I mean, obviously, I just want to see them in good health.
Yes.
In the new year. But I think the thing that caught my eye this year wasn't actually any of the official royal tours, but the unofficial royal tour by Harry and Meghan when they went to Nigeria. And suddenly they Meghan discovered her homeland. Harry started talking to the Nigerians as their in-laws. You know, the poor people, leave them alone, I think. But I thought that caught more headlines than any of the official royal tours and caused more of a stir.
Well, it certainly did, actually, because it certainly looked like an official visit.
It was like, for once, Meghan was being treated like the princess that she believes herself to be.
Exactly, still. Paul, going back to the actual working royals, which, of course, the Sussexes aren't anymore.
No.
It is good that they're both back in rude health, but it's been, I think, quite refreshing for the two of them to speak candidly about cancer, because it is something that's going to affect more and more of us.
I can remember maybe 30, 40 years ago where cancer was a taboo subject and people talked about the big C, didn't even say the word cancer. And, of course, a lot of men in particular would die of cancers that could have been stopped early doors. And I think the royals speaking out about their own journeys and their own experiences is a really, really important thing. I think, all credit to them for doing that, because it will save lives ultimately, because people will get
I
treatment.
agree. Well said. All right, lots more to come on the show from my panel. We're going to look at some of the comments you've posted. First of all, though, if you're in search of some winter sun, here's the forecast for some of the top European holiday destinations.
I forecast a perfect holiday in the sun.
Weather looking good then?
For sure, and no worries about our travel insurance.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
Hello there, welcome to your latest winter sun forecast. Well, as we see at 2024, it's going to remain fairly unsettled for parts of Cyprus and Greece. This area of cloud and rain continues to linger here. But for much of Italy, Spain and Portugal, a fairly quiet couple of days with some late winter sunshine here. A few showers for Madeira, maybe just creeping into Canaries. But as we approach New Year's Day itself, it should be fairly fine and dry across the Canaries.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Robert Walton has been jet-setting in recent weeks in Singapore for the YYY Awards and then back to London to host the inaugural Restaurant Association Awards.
Yep, and after many years in the industry, Robert also knows a thing or two about how to create the perfect Christmas. And it's all in the preparation. So we're going to be asking him about that as well. I'm delighted to say that the godfather of hospitality, Robert Walton, MBE, joins us now on the sofa.
Morning, Robert.
Robert,
Good
morning. Good to see you. And what a busy few weeks you have had. Yeah. Should we start with the YYY Awards? Because I think it's just wonderful who you celebrated at those awards.
So, the YYY, young chef, young waiter, young mixologist. And
It's competition that's created around the world, so people from all around the world can apply. So this year we had 9 countries, from India to the Caribbean, from the USA to Scotland and England. And so we had 27 young professionals. The average age was about 24.
Wow.
All coming to Singapore. So we flew everyone to Singapore. We create what I call the Olympic Village. We create a little village for them, and it's in a very cool spot with great bars. And then we have the competition. And this year, I can now announce, I was here just a few weeks ago before we had the competition, that the USA won, which was absolutely incredible. Thailand was second. And gorgeous Wales was third.
Yes. Well done, Wales.
Well done, Wales.
We now expect to have a good meal. There's no reason why you shouldn't have good food. The key now is the service, because there's no reason why you don't have good service. And good service is not that difficult. Smile, to start with. It really isn't that difficult. It's called hospitable. We call the industry, or the sector we look after is the hospitality industry, which is all about being hospitable.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to The Weekend with me, Darren Grimes. Now, to get to some of your views now, KJT has written in, and KJT says, like the rest of the country, the farmers were lied to, and that is why they're angry. Paul?
Well, it's not the farmers, is it? Most farmers are unaffected, as I say.
Well, I think, Labour was courting farmers during the election, courting rural voters and winning lots of constituencies that, they might not have done in previous elections, lots of rural areas.
Exactly. They've got 100 rural MPs.
Exactly, and they're in trouble now because it is much bigger, I think, than Paul is suggesting. People are really furious about it.
But he did stand up, Paul, though, and say it to the National Farmers Union that he wouldn't do anything like this. Is that not a blatant lie?
Well, I think when Labour opened the books and saw the mess was the economy...
So they thought, I'll make 500...
They thought everyone has to pay their fair share, which is all we're doing.
Apart from, the deluge of people that we're funding asylum for.
Well, they deserve a fair break too,
They do not. Coming from France, come on. Right, and Journeyman says... I agree with you, Darren, about the pull factor for would-be illegal immigrants. We should not allow foreign-based courts to influence our courts in any way. Fraser?
Yes, I agree with that. The European Convention on Human Rights is hugely outdated, set up in the wake of the Second World War, and the court has allowed it to metastasize and create, judgments that are completely perverse. So,
do you think it's ideological?
Well, whether it's ideological or not, I think, the problem is you end up with these bizarre cases where, there was a recent case where a man who assaulted his own stepdaughter was not allowed to be deported from the UK because of his right to a family life. Yeah. The family that he is banned from seeing because of assaulting his stepdaughter. So you end up with these really, something set up with good intentions. We agree with many of the core principles, but the judgments just end up becoming bizarre, and there's nothing you can do about it because it's not like you can elect a new set of judges.
And it's enshrined in the Human Rights Act. Paul, thoughts on that?
I support international laws because so many of the problems we face are international.
OK, right, but on that point that Fraser's raising there, though, on the particular case and examples like it, surely you accept that they're a bit bizarre.
But that's an argument for changing the laws or refining them or updating them, not for scrapping the whole business. International law is there to protect all of us, whether it's on the environment or human rights or whatever it is, labour laws included. It's a good thing to have those international agreements because we are an international world, aren't we?
And the point is, though, that the case law now is set. It's set a precedent.
And I just don't think that, Britain is not going to slide into tyranny or something. No. We don't have essentially a foreign supranational court. We have a very good record on liberties and on human rights, and that should be a job for our domestic lawmakers and for domestic courts.
I mean, all I want for Christmas is to leave the ECHR, to stop net zero, to respect our farmers, and to have a happy, good 2025.
And
but I don't think I'm going to get it.
Don't forget the air fryer.
All right, thanks to Fraser there and to Paul. You've been with me, Darren Grimes, on GB.
Despite the morning rain, it'll be a nice, warm, cosy day ahead. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. Well, as we move into 2025, the weather is certainly turning much more unsettled across the country. A risk of some disruption in places as areas of low pressure move in. But at the moment, we still have high pressure across the south, keeping things fairly settled here. But weather fronts already providing plenty of rain across Scotland. And if anything, as we go through the course of the evening, that rain intensifies across parts of Scotland. Also, could just